The sun had barely broken the horizon over the walls of Acre when the shouting began, not from the Saracens, but from within the Crusader camp. The city had finally fallen after a brutal 2-year siege, but instead of celebration, there was unrest. Knights who had stood shoulder to shoulder in battle now turned on one another. The smoke from victory still hung in the air, yet it carried the scent of something darker: betrayal. Acre had been a prize soaked in blood. Crusaders from across Europe, French, English, German, and Italian, had bled into the soil outside its walls. They had starved in trenches, fought in waves, endured plague and ambush and the merciless heat of a Levantine sun. They believed that taking Acre would be the key to Jerusalem, and when the gates finally opened, they believed they had won. But no one could agree on who the victory truly belonged to. With the city now, there's old tensions flared. Flags were torn from battlements. Words turned to insults. Richard the Lionheart, newly arrived but decisive in his impact, clashed with Leopold of Austria and Philip of France. Richard, in a moment that would echo for years, is said to have torn down Leopold's banner from the city walls and thrown it into the dirt. Accusations of cowardice, arrogance, and greed flowed faster than the wine that had been poured to toast their so-called unity. The prize of Acre, its fortifications, its wealth, its strategic value was immense. But with no single leader to claim it all, chaos reigned. Philip, wounded in pride and body, left the crusade and returned home. Leopold followed. The once cohesive campaign fractured in silence and resentment. Crusader knights, who had sworn sacred vows and crossed seas together, began to view one another as rivals rather than brothers. In the midst of this division, Richard sought to maintain control. He negotiated with Saladin, offering to release Muslim prisoners in exchange for ransom. Saladin delayed, perhaps testing the new king's patience, or perhaps simply stalling to regroup. But Richard would not wait. In front of Acre's walls, under the horrified eyes of both Christians and Muslims, he ordered the mass execution of nearly 3,000 prisoners. Bound, unarmed, helpless, they were marched out and slaughtered. It was not war. It was a message. The message, however, did not unify. It isolated. It darkened Richard's name and turned the gaze of the world upon the Crusaders with doubt and disgust. What had been seen as a holy war now reeked of vengeance and cruelty. And still, the Crusaders bickered. Alliances crumbled like dry mortar. What Saladin's army could not destroy, Crusader pride was unraveling from within. The crusade dragged on, limping forward with fewer leaders and less trust. Richard would continue to battle Saladin in the months ahead, winning and losing with equal brilliance and recklessness. But the chance to retake Jerusalem faded. Without unity, the crusade had no spine. Acre was theirs, but the spirit of the crusade had died the moment those banners were torn down and trampled. Leopold never forgot the insult. When Richard was later captured on his journey home, it was Leopold who played a hand in his imprisonment. The memory of Acre's betrayal ran deep, and it poisoned everything that followed. The fall of Acre was not just a military turning point. It was a moral collapse, a moment when pride overcame purpose, and ambition severed the cords of brotherhood. The lesson has echoed across centuries. Acre shows us that the enemy is not always outside the walls. Sometimes, it rides beside you, swears the same oath, and wears the same cross. Courage took Acre, but pride lost what came after. And in that, there is a truth worth carrying forward. Betrayal does not begin with the sword. It begins with the self.